Here's what always intrigues me about the ending of The Locket. Did Nancy manipulate her return to the place where all her troubles began, or is it merely a fateful coincidence? Now, tell me what you think over on the Noir Alley Facebook page or on our Twitter feed. It's the sort of distinction that's crucial to a noirista. What drives characters toward ruination? The twisted machinations of the human mind or the cruel vagaries of fate? Yeah, there's a discussion that'll fit snugly into a tweet. Now, stories in which a person's destiny is propelled by a traumatic childhood event, they were all the rage in the 1940s. In fact, 3 of them were released around the same time: Spellbound, The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, and The Locket. One reason for this, of course, was that psychoanalysis had taken hold of the movie colony, particularly among writers and actors. Ben Mankiewicz's Uncle Joe was one of the leading proponents of psychoanalysis being used to enhance creativity. And this was the case with the writer of The Locket, Norma Barsman, who'd been an analyst for years before tackling this story. Her husband, Ben Barsman, was a reporter turned screenwriter with a few credits already under his belt. While vacationing in Mexico, they met a woman named Belle Gardner, an East Coast blue blood who had abandoned her aristocratic family over an incident just like the one in The Locket. The daughter of the family's housekeeper was falsely accused of stealing, her mother was fired, and the girl, who was Belle's closest friend, suffered a steady slide into kleptomania and depression. Now, the story haunted Norma, so she set about turning it into her first screenplay. And maybe because it was her first, she had no qualms about creating a complex, spiraling narrative that linked the flashbacks of 3 separate characters. Although Sheridan Gibney got sole credit for the screenplay, all he really did, at the request of producer Burt Granite, was shift the wartime section to England. Otherwise, it's Norma Barsman's script. And several years ago, she finally won the right to have her name reapplied to the film. Why it wasn't there in the first place is a mystery, to me at least. The Locket was made before the Barsmans were targeted by the House Committee on Un-American Activities, so their avowed involvement with the Communist Party of the United States shouldn't have been a factor. It wasn't when Ben wrote the script of Back to Bataan, a popular war picture from 1945. Of course, a few years later, after he'd written the 1948 political allegory The Boy with Green Hair, Ben Barsman was blacklisted. He and Norma moved to England, where he wrote the script for Give Us This Day, also known as Christ in Concrete, one of 2 films directed by Edward Dmytryk when he was in self-imposed exile, avoiding a congressional subpoena to testify against colleagues in the Hollywood 10. When Dmytryk bartered his way back into Hollywood by finally naming names, the Barsmans were among those he identified as communists. And as a result, they spent the next 20 years living and working in Europe, mostly in England, where Ben wrote scripts for fellow blacklistee Joseph Losey, including Stranger on the Prowl, Time Without Pity, Chance Meeting, and These Are the Damned. Now, he'd get Hollywood work again in the early 1960s, thanks to producer Samuel Bronston, who hired him, without credit, to write screenplays for a trio of big-budget spectacles: El Cid, 55 Days at Peking, and The Fall of the Roman Empire. Now, German-born Hans Brahm was one of the more neglected of the many directors who continued their careers in Hollywood after escaping life under Hitler. His father, Ludwig Brahm, was a popular comedic actor, and his uncle Otto was a theater producer credited with discovering Max Reinhardt. Now, to me, Brahm is one of those directors who could rightly be called an auteur, because no matter what the material, he brought to bear a visual style filled with ominous shadows and a sense of foreboding. His films have a menacing mood that often smeared the line between horror and noir. And you can always get into a good argument over whether The Lodger and Hangover Square, made back-to-back by Brahm at Fox, are horror movies or film noir. Something else to discuss on social media. Now, next week on Noir Alley, nothing so complex as today's film. Join me back here for Desperate, 78 minutes of straight-ahead suspense from director Anthony Mann, featuring Raymond Burr in one of his many memorably villainous roles. Till then, see you in the shadows.